Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. On behalf and as a member of the board of the Young German Council on Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations, I'm so sorry. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, Mind the Gap, Bridging the Generational Disconnect in the Perception of Threats and Political Narratives. We are thrilled to see so many of you here, and we are grateful to Airbus for this collaboration and for making this important discussion possible. The Young GDAP is a platform dedicated to empowering the next generation of foreign policymakers and leaders. We are a network of young professionals and students from across Germany who are committed to shaping the future of international relations. In a time of global uncertainty, our mission is to equip young voices to engage meaningfully in policy debates and decision-making processes. The world is changing rapidly, and with it, the way we perceive security threats. The younger generation often sees threats and risks, as well as solutions, differently from established political leaders. Whether it is cybersecurity, climate change, or geopolitical tensions, there's an increasing gap between the priorities of decision makers and the concerns of young people. This evening, we will dig deeper into these differences, exploring how political narratives and generational perspectives shape our understanding of national and international security. Our aim is not only to analyze these gaps, but also to bridge them. Through open dialogue, we want to foster a security discourse that includes the voices of those who will live with the consequences of today's policies. We believe that by aligning on core values and redefining spaces, physical, virtual, and cultural, that are worth defending, we can contribute to a more cohesive and forward-looking national security strategy. I would like to extend my gratitude to our esteemed panelist, who will get on stage later, the America House, for making it possible to host tonight's event, and of course to all of you joining us tonight for this important conversation. We look forward to an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Without further ado, I would like to welcome on stage both of our moderators of tonight. First of all, I would like to welcome and ask Natalia Valeria Müller on stage, regional lead of the Young GDAP in Munich region and main organizer of tonight's event. She will be joined by her second moderator, Nicole Kleb, chair of the board of the Young GDAP. Thank you so much, and enjoy tonight's debate.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Svenja. A round of applause for my co-chair, Svenja Bonin, who has taken time out of her very busy day. She is actually proactively working at the Munich Security Conference, so thank you very much for being here and introducing us today. And without any further ado, please join us in a rather welcome round of applause for our esteemed panelists. First of all, we would like to introduce to you Professor Dr. Ulrich Heunkes. Professor Dr. Heunkes is the professor of Roman Studies and Teacher Education at the Christian Albrecht University of Kiel, and since 2015, he has been dedicated to building an interdisciplinary anxiety culture research project in collaboration with the Teachers College of Columbia University, and another welcome round of applause because he is spending his birthday with us tonight.
Then we have Johannes Müller. He is Head of Sustainability and Communications at Airbus Defence and Space. And one interesting fact about him, He's a freelance conflict photographer as well, since 2011, supporting humanitarian projects and initiatives. So a round of applause for Johannes. And then we have Michael Stempfle. He is Director of the Press and Communications Office and spokesperson of the Federal Ministry of Defense. And some will definitely know him as well for his previous work at the Tagesschau and the ARD.
And last but not least, we would like to welcome our very own Dr. Kira Winke to the stage. Dr. Winke is head of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy of the German Council on Foreign Relations and a member of the advisory board for the federal government for civilian crisis prevention and peace building. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
And we would like to take the first step and introducing you, the audience, with a tiny Slido. You can scan the QR code above, or you go on the website slido.com and use the code you see there after the hashtag. And you can participate in this question, who will guide us a little bit through the discussion as well. So our question is, of the following possible risks or threats, to what extent would you say each of them is a real threat at the moment? You can rank them in the direction you click on it. And we will wait a little bit, and you see on the screen what's happening when each of you is participating.
All right.
Is going much around? But it's still at 12. Everybody's thinking, I guess.
That is very interesting. You will see why in just a few moments. Keep on voting. We'll give you some more time. You can also change your mind.
And
peer pressure.
And you will see why Natalia and I are laughing a little bit when we carry on with the discussion as well.
Okay. Would you roll for the next?
I think 87 could be most of them who participated. Natalia, would you?
Yes. Okay. I think the results are quite clear, and okay, almost quite clear. Last round, let's go. Okay.
Battle on the top.
So, I think we got our results, which is quite interesting. See, one of the reasons why we're having this esteemed panel here tonight and we're having this discussion with our panelists and, of course, also with you, is because fantastic, I lost my cards. So sorry for that. The Instituto de Empresa University has recently launched a survey amongst about 3,600 participants aged between 18 and 35 from several countries in the EU, like the UK, France, Germany, and Spain, to get a better understanding on how specifically young people perceive current threats, the defense industry as such, and of course the overall security landscape in Europe. And the results were quite interesting. Of course, here we do not have a specifically generational perception of threats because we have a very diverse round of guests here, but since the study was sponsored by Airbus Space and Defense, Mr. Müller, I would like to ask you, can you please tell us what the key findings of this study were?
Sure. First of all, thank you for being here, and thanks for having us on the panel. Digging directly into the topic, we saw it over the last couple of weeks and days, and yes, actually hours, there's a great perception, an increase of perception of what is security, what is defense. However, when we did the study back in last year, there was a couple of striking findings that deserve to be named. For instance, that it's below 10% of the younger population of Europe can name only one defense company. And that explains a little bit why people are not particularly familiar with the topic. The second thing is that 70 or even more than 70% of the people ranked as the highest risk, and it is pretty close to what we just learned. Terrorism is one major threat, but also cyber attacks, one of the top 3 items that might endanger security and safety all over Europe. However, when asked about China as a country, it was only ranked below the third quarter. So it's really striking to see, on the one hand side, cyber is a big perceived threat. On the other hand, it's China not perceived as a threat. If we now calculate back where most of the cyber attacks are coming from, it needs to be said it's China. On the other hand, it's almost 50%, and probably these days even more % of young Europeans argue there will be a major armed conflict all over the continent in the next couple of years. However, only 10% would be willing to volunteer and to follow the call. So basically, a lot of things that somehow strike us as being a little bit schizophrenic on the one hand side, if we put it bluntly. But on the other hand, having one major finding, which is we need to step our engagement with younger Europeans. We need to educate, we need to offer an intuitive set of data and knowledge on defense topics. Otherwise, it's not us, you will be the leaders of the next generation, and we need to step up our joint efforts on how we talk about defense and what it actually means.
Thank you for that. I would like to bring in Dr. Heunkes. You are in the Anxiety Culture Project, and anxiety plays a big role in the perception of threats. So given the outcomes of the study Mr. Müller just described, I am, and I'm sure the audience is too, very much wondering why young people perceive certain threats the way they do, and how they which factors play a role in that. So maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on that.
I hope so. So thanks, Nicole, and thanks to the organizers. I would like really to express my thanks for having me here and for the opportunity to participate in this high-level panel discussion. I was invited actually by you as a representative of the Anxiety Culture Project, as you said, and we have been conducting this project since 2015 as a part of a global research network from Kiel University in Germany and from Columbia University in New York. And together with my colleagues, we recently published a book with the Johns Hopkins University Press, which aroused some interest around the world. So let me say a few words by way of introduction about this culture of anxiety that we are studying from the perspective of a wide range of disciplines. And it's an assessment of the cultural significance of anxiety that seeks to emphasize its value at the social level. This may sound surprising at first, but it does not help us, as we think, to banish fear from our thoughts and actions in a difficult situation like the one we live in, when it could become even a dynamic factor for better development. So in 2019, the German historian Frank Blies, who teaches in the United States as a university professor in California, published an important book called Republic of Fear, Republik der Angst. In it, he describes the post-war history of the Federal Republic of Germany as a success story that emerged from the pressure of socially perceived fears. Today, a few years after the publication of this book, I guess we have reached a point where young and old would like to see our current fears not dismissed in public discourse, but turned into more or less constructive action. So at this point, I think that the generation gap may prove problematic. So you ask me why, how, and with what consequences do young people really today feel anxiety, and how does this affect their patterns of thought and behavior. Allow me, as a representative of the older generation who I am, to say in advance how I see myself in what I'm saying about the youth and so on. So as a university professor, I work with young people on a daily basis, and as a researcher and as a humanities scholar, my research is primarily qualitative. So in view of the threatening developments of our time, I'm interested in the cognitive emotional processing of young people and the effects on their actions. Yes, one conclusion of these studies is clear: young people are strongly influenced by fears about future and fears about asserting themselves as individuals in the harsh present. That means finding an appropriate role in the professional and private lives. Young people today tend to live with an excess of anxiety rather than in an evasive emotional state of ease and peace some people think they live in. So in terms of national security, as we are speaking about national security tonight, which we see as particularly threatened at the moment, the main problem is not that young people are unaware of the dangers and threats currently posed, for example, by the aggressive global strategies of Russia and in another way of China. However, we must assume that for a number of reasons, this awareness does not translate into immediate fears. So why is this the case? In the brevity required by my answer today, let me be blunt. A culture of anxiety does not mean being helplessly exposed or at the mercy of anxiety as an emotion. For many young people, it means developing an overall picture of a complex threat situation in this world, setting priorities from the perspective of their generation, and also following rational insights and convictions, personal convictions. Yeah, I don't want to be too long with my answer. You said about 5 minutes or so we can stop here and perhaps fill in afterward with other arguments.
We have definitely follow-up questions in the ongoing round, I be sure.
Absolutely, and you are more than welcome to answer the questions that are specifically posed to another person, because I feel a lot of them apply to each one of you and your specific expertise. But Mr. Stempfle, as part of your work as the spokesperson for the Federal Ministry of Defense, it's your job to strategically communicate with the public, with the citizens, about the crises and the threats that we face as a society and also as a country. So now, given that what we've heard from Mr. Müller and Professor Dr. Heunkes, are you a little bit surprised by the results that we see in the study, and maybe also the results that we've seen the public vote on today, considering how young people evaluate risk seemingly differently compared to what we've seen dominate our political and also media narratives in the past couple of years?
Thanks for having me and for being able to share our views here on the stage. No, we're not surprised. I'm not surprised because we think about that very often. Why is there a different threat perception in the younger generation compared to other generations, or to young people, let's say, in Scandinavian countries? And we think about that, we talk about it, of course, but let me say one thing before I have my explanation to that, and that would be the study that you presented is basically a look at what people said in 24. But we mustn't forget that, you know, it's a dynamic process, and we're talking about things differently today than we used to do that maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So things are changing, and for instance, we have more and more young people also applying for training or jobs in the Bundeswehr. So things are changing, and we realize that also in talks with young people. But then again, why is there a different threat perception in the younger generation? I would say that we have told young people all their life long, that we live surrounded by partners and friends, and nothing can happen to us. Even in 2014, when there was the annexation of Crimea by Russia, we said, okay, we can still do business with Russia. We can still, go on with the diplomatic process, the Minsk process, hoping that things will, turn to the better. And other Eastern European countries told us, be careful, you might get more and more dependent on Russia, and Russia is dangerous. But the minister used to say, the other countries woke up, or the Eastern countries woke up, and we pressed the snooze button, and we kept on sleeping till 22. And then suddenly there was what the chancellor called Zeitenwende, which was really important to say that. But I mean, for those people who were told by the whole society, by the majority of journalists, by the majority of politicians, and by a lot of experts, things are okay, you don't have to worry. Of course, they say, okay, what's going on? Why should we suddenly have this change? And I can understand that they are kind of insecure and do not know how suddenly to perceive threat in a different way. So that would be the explanation. And the thing that we can do, I, as a speaker of a ministry, we would always say we have to analyze the situation. We have to explain how dangerous Putin is. We have to explain and tell the people that he changed from his economy to war economy, that he produces a lot of weapons, that he wants to have 1.5 million soldiers in a couple of years, and that he's preparing maybe for something bigger, and that we have to be aware of that. And when we're honest and explain how the situation is, that might help convincing people what the threat situation is like. That's what we are doing. This is, let's say, the communication that you do by talking, and there's also, you mentioned the strategic communication. We will also talk about, is it necessary to have a conscription, what we call Neuer Wehrdienst? So our minister developed a model for that. And this is something that young people have to ask themselves, who is actually, or who are the people who secure our country? And this discussion will also help to ask oneself, where does security come from? It's nothing that is just can be taken for granted. Someone has to, secure the borders and so on. And one more measurement, if you may say, this is the brigade. Up to 27, we are going to deploy a full combat-ready brigade, 5,000 men and women to Lithuania. This is something that electrifies soldiers, because they realize, okay, we are going to go to the eastern flank to support Lithuania and to deter aggressors like Russia. And at the same time, it's also a strategic communication to show everyone we have to deter aggressors. These are many ways of communicating the threat situation and trying to get in contact and in discussions with young people.
I think what is very interesting is that we have certain things young people kind of rally around as well. Like, for example, climate change in the past years were like a huge topic, and we saw mobilizing young people in, for example, Fridays for Future went very well, and also nowadays they're also still on the streets on Friday, for example. So we have certain topics which mobilize very well, and the narratives work, and young people rally around it, and studies shows that as well, like the Shell Youth study, or my colleagues at Bertelsmann Foundation had studies on that as well. Like climate change, always high ranking on the top 5, usually around the fears of young people. So I would like to take Kira, sorry, Dr. Finke, on the panel, and would like to ask you, what are your thoughts on that? Can we learn something from the climate change movements, and what is the climate change community doing right, which the defense community could probably also learn from?
I mean, the interactions of climate change and security are quite complex, and I think the youth has grown up with the understanding of climate change, it being a reality. So the IPCC report started maybe 3 decades ago. So those of us who are in their 30s or younger, they grew up with climate information. Many have taken this as a subject in school. So I think that's part of the generational divide. And then, of course, also the issue of risk, right? So if you're a young person, over the course of your life expectancy, you will see many more climate change effects than an older person will still have to experience. And so there's a huge generational divide, and it extends actually to future generations also, because the risks that we are currently causing by emitting so much CO2 into the atmosphere, they will extend into thousands of years. And this is old knowledge that has been around for decades. So we are seeing also, I think, a different perception of youth in many areas of risk, of threats, because simply youth have grown up with a different set of securities than older generations, in my view. So we may think, oh, the youth is doing well, like they can travel quite more, relatively more than older generations. They maybe have a nice iPhone or whatever. However, a lot of this benefits of, let's say, consumerism, in my view, were traded in for a lack of security in other areas, and this includes long-term job, safe pension, the ability to buy a property or flat. And so there's a different set of securities that are missing for the young generation, and that, I think, also influences people's expectation and also their willingness to get behind certain issues or not.
So it's also a little bit a part of education that young people know what's on the line with climate change and probably don't know about defense, if I understand you correctly.
Exactly, and maybe it's also the mindset of wanting to invest more into prevention, right? So in midst of all these crises, how do we still prevent crises on top of that? And I think if you look at the climate security nexus and the effects when you have to start calling in the military is already at the end of a long escalation of a conflict. So you can't shoot a drought, right? So you need to go to the root causes and actually try to avoid, first of all, the emissions. But then if we are already witnessing climate change effects as we are today, we have to see how people can better adapt to these changes and foster those adaptation measures to get out of these risk spirals, basically.
Thank you so much, Kira, for this fascinating statement. And I think it's actually really interesting to look at now at this intersection between climate change and security, because while the climate change has mobilized people up to the point where it swayed entire elections. When we look back at the 2019 European election, for example, or the 2021 Bundestag election, the Greens have majority of gains and have influenced politics after that. So it's obviously that the risk of climate change has really moved the young generation to action. Now, the interesting question here is from your work, Dr. Heunkes, with the Anxiety Culture Project. How does the perception of control influence this divide? Could the ability to take individual or collective action on climate change, for example, through protest or through lifestyle changes that we have seen the youth movement behind the climate change movement follow through, reduce anxiety and foster actual engagement, while the perceived inevitability or personal cost of engagement with conflict, defense, and security issues leads to apathy or avoidance?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the latest study on the impact of climate change on global crises was published only this week, and it was commissioned by the Federal Foreign Office, the Ministry of Defense, and it includes contributions of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Intelligence Service. So they all classify our climate crisis as, I quote, the greatest security threat of our time. So this leads me to think first of all, that our young people are right to make this a priority, and also right to criticize the failures of political leaders in the field. So if you ask me about fear, I believe that young people in the Western world are much more afraid of climate change than of war. That there is more Klimaangst really than Kriegsangst among them. And their fear is not just emotional, but is backed up by many factual arguments that are also shaping the intellectual discourse on the threats of our time in general. So when we launched our project on anxiety culture, the influential sociologist Ulrich Beck warned himself against the traditional understanding of his own theory of the risk society, with all the side effects he himself had outlined. Because, as he said, we were now in a period of metamorphosis, triggered above all by, as he says, climate change. Almost a decade after the proclamation of this turning point, we now hear the proclamation of a second turning point towards more armament and back to Cold War. So this creates a great deal of uncertainty in the interpretation of the major crises of our time. What are the real long-term causes of mass migration, for example? Is it global warming or is it an armed conflict? I believe that many people currently perceive war or the threat of war as a consequence of larger and deeper factors that are destabilizing the balance in our world. And the biggest long-term factor in destabilization is probably the climate crisis and its economic consequences due to our addiction to energy, as we all know. People, whether young or old, know this, and they are more rational than we think when they fear that too much of our financial resources might be going to the arms race. But I found one key word in your question particularly interesting, the reference to control perception. So we get it wrong very easily, I think. Young people are not just taking to the streets on Fridays to fight for their future or our future. They are really changing their lifestyles in ways that older people can hardly imagine. No cars, no meat, no flights, less heated homes. So, but they are doing all this not to alleviate their fear, and it is not having this effect on them. On the contrary, there is another key word, I think, and it's powerlessness. So, Ohnmacht. Powerlessness is unfortunately a twin of fear in our anxiety culture. And this powerlessness leads many to the brink of despair when they think about the consequences of the climate crisis, which we are definitely not tackling with enough determination around the world. Can I add a word on perhaps the political conflict?
I'm sorry, Johannes, maybe you can adjust your microphone a little bit because it's...
Your microphone is touching your face.
Where is
yes.
Put it a bit away from the... Can
you? Yeah, you should do that.
Yeah.
It would be better to be understood.
Carry on.
Okay, so just a last comment on... We should not underestimate, of course, the fear of political conflicts. I don't want to be misunderstood, and the fear of wars in the light of the recent developments. But it is a fact, I think, that the loss of political control in Germany, but we have better experts around here, that the loss of political control in Germany and Europe does not appear to be as great as is currently claimed, even after the change in US security policy, which we witnessed yesterday. So an intelligent, to my opinion, an intelligent European policy can make a difference in the short and medium term, even if it means sacrifices and higher defense spending, which are unavoidable, I think. So in our Western world, we still have a very solid degree of confidence in the effectiveness of democracy and in political decision-making based on democracy. So, and trust in democracy is definitely a good way to de-escalate fears, which is my topic, and support uncomfortable decisions as well. So in this sense, I think it would be premature to accuse our youth of apathy or avoidance, as you said. So I don't think this would be a good judgment for that.
I saw a little bit of writing over there, so I would take it to Kira. You probably want to say something.
Because I find this research very fascinating. I have a question. I don't know if it falls into your area of research, but because I do think that this anxiety, may it be climate change, may it be for geopolitical crises, this fear is real, and it is justified, so to say, right? So this anxiety is somehow, in my view, justified in many cases. But my question is, why we can feel fear, we shouldn't become cowards. And how do we become brave, right, in the face of fear? So how do we not get paralyzed? I'm just wondering, do you have any insights on how to overcome fear, maybe for youth or us middle-aged people?
Well, there are several ways. I've not the solution to this problem, because we are discussing the big problems which have emerged because we don't have definite solutions, and we don't have the means to do the best thing to overcome them. But and this is what I mean when I refer to powerlessness. No? So in the climate crisis. But I think to be strong in a situation of anxiety is not a contradiction. So we have to understand anxiety, and as we call it, anxiety culture, in a correct way. And we have to take fears and anxiety seriously. And we don't have to say that on the one hand there is emotion, anxiety, and shivering, and on the other hand there is rational thinking and good arguments and the best way to act against the risks we are facing. No, it's combined. Our brain is combining emotion and rational thinking, and I think we are not prepared to this combination so far. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and misleading of these two aspects. So politicians, for example, we just had this talk before we came in, they have the tendency to manipulate anxieties of young people in short-term, let's say, objectives. But what is important is to come from the feeling of anxiety to a rational debate, and this debate must be based on democratic principles. And we are far away from this culture of debate, I think. This is one of the biggest problems.
You mentioned manipulation, sorry. And politicians. I would like to, it's a little bit rude, but I would like to ask you in this concept, because we had this election talks in the past weeks, and everybody's talking about migration, but on this panel and also on the Munich Security Conference, most of the people are talking about Russia. It's a little bit of wondering, how can we take the public with us? Like, we don't want to make them anxious, but we also want them to know what threats are there, and we also want them to feel a little bit more empowered, I guess, so they don't come into this anxiety culture. So my question would be, is it an issue to take young people with us, and how is the ministry trying to ensure that young people feel, a little bit more empowered also in security issues, and rally around it and mobilize and go to the Bundeswehr, for example, and stuff like that? What is on the agenda, I would say?
I think the best way to deal with the situation is to be very open and to speak out frankly what the facts are. And I think we have deceived ourselves for a very long time, saying that we are secure and we can neglect the Bundeswehr for 30 years. This is what we're facing now. We don't have enough weapon systems. We, in 22, decided to take 100 billions into our hands and then buy those weapon systems, ammunition, and so on to be stronger from now on, and that will take some time. So that's the first step. It won't be enough after having neglected the Bundeswehr for 30 years, as I said. And this is one point, and then the other point is what you mentioned, the personnel. And you can have the best weapon systems in the world. It doesn't help you if you don't have the personnel for that, because someone has to use them. And that's actually a very important question. And yes, you have to be open in the discussion. Our minister went very far with this provocative word. We have to be war-fighting capable. That was, of course, something to make people think about, oh, wow, war. This is a word that you normally don't use in Germany because, people get afraid, as you said. But then again, they think about it and realize if you only talk about deterrence and defense, it makes you feel a lot better, as if instead when you say we have to be able to fight a war in case we get attacked. And so I think we talk about it more openly, and I think this is very important. Russia is one of the biggest threats for Europe, and I mean, you differed between cyber threats and Russia. Maybe these are not two different things. Many of the cyber threats and attacks might come from Russia. And this is why, you have to talk about that. At the same time, we talked about the new role of the US administration. We all know that they will shift their focus from Europe step by step to the Indo-Pacific. So our minister had talks about that too, and he suggested that there has to be a roadmap in order to organize all this, what this shift of focus will mean, and so that there won't be any security gaps. But all this together shows that the challenges are big, and it would be wrong to keep on deceiving ourselves, but instead talk about that frankly, and that, from my point of view, would help to overcome the fear, because once you know the threat, once you have ideas how to deal with the threat, I mean, NATO is a lot stronger than it used to be before Putin did this full invasion in the Ukraine. And we have friends, and we ramp up, and we do a lot of things that are good, and we have to keep on going. And this should also give confidence and see that we're not alone. We're helping each other. We're trying to find new ways. That would be probably the right way to deal with it.
I would have a follow-up question, if I may. Because Dr. Heunke has told us about the powerlessness. And of course, we are active when we get into the Ministry of Defense or volunteer for being a soldier or something civilian. But is there any other possibility to be in the decision-making process or to foster ideas? Is this part of the discussion yet, or is it something new we probably see in the next years to involve young people actually in the process of getting the solutions and making the decision to go to war probably someday, hopefully not, but...
Well, the main message would be, if we are able, if we are war-fighting capable, then Russia won't attack us. I mean, this is why we're doing it, because then we're able to deter, and we are too dangerous as to, Putin would not think of attacking us when we're strong. So, and including young people in a discussion, that was your question. Yes, I mean, we have what we call Jugendoffiziere. I don't know the word in English. Does anyone know?
Youth officers?
Young soldiers who go to schools and talk with young students and talk about security, all those topics. And when once a year they come to the ministry, and we have a chat, and then they told me in 24 that they had a lot of discussions about whether the neue Wehrdienst, the conscription model of our minister, is necessary or not. So I think, talking to them is very important, and we do that on different levels. And also, I mean, as I said, the minister traveled to Scandinavia, and we realized that young people in Scandinavia do not only think about, either go to the military, but there are also different ways of, helping your countries if things get more difficult. I mean, you can, as you said, be part of the civilian defense. There are different ways to integrate young people. I mean, what is planned at the moment is called Operationsplan Deutschland, so that there's different ways of, contribute, so that you find the way you could help your own country, whatever is perfect for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful answer. I think before we continue with the regular program, I would actually like to turn back to yesterday to J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, which has caused quite a stir among basically everyone whom I've spoken to. And it is posing a very important question, because is this a new environment that we are looking at ourselves, finding ourselves in, where we find ourselves, and I mean ourselves as Europe on our own, where we are facing no allyship from someone who has been a guarantor for our security for the past decades, and who has switched the narrative to the biggest threat to our common security goals not being Russia or the attack on our common values, but switched the narrative to what are our common values. And I saw quite a rift between what J.D. Vance said yesterday to what is actually perceived within Europe as our common values. And how do we move on from this, what we said? Are we in a new environment, security-wise, after this speech, which kind of combines everything that we've put on a display as threats for our common security? It is both Russia, it is cybercrime, maybe not so much climate change, but still with the Trump environment pulling out of the Paris Agreement, maybe also a little bit of that. So how do we move on from this? Because quite frankly spoken, as someone who has followed, the invasion of Crimea in 2014, the first Trump administration, the war of aggression in 2022, the second Trump administration, it seems to me that our politicians are still missing the wake-up call. Is that a new wake-up call for us, and can we do something with this for our common security?
I could start.
Of course.
I'll keep it short. 2 points. You were asking whether the security situation has changed. I would say that so far the Trump administration has said, and Pete Hegseth said that in Brussels, we will not turn our backs on you. And another quote is, we don't go anywhere. So I think they'll stay in Europe, and so I wouldn't say no. I would say no, that there will not be a completely different situation. At the same time, we all know that the Europeans have to do more, and this is also what the Americans say, but we know that by ourselves. This is one point, and the other thing is, you mentioned the different values. So yes, we were, I talk about myself, I was also very surprised by the speech, and I think my boss replied to that in a very firm way. And yes, I mean, the new US administration is still new, and they have to find, a way to work together. I think being honest is the best way, so that's what happened yesterday. So my minister replied very firmly to what Vance said, and I think this is how you have to do it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Müller?
I'd echo and nod. I think from a geopolitical standpoint, it was absolutely not new what we learned throughout the last couple of days and maybe even hours. I mean, maybe the way the handbook on manners, the tone has disruptively been changed by the new administration. However, let's be clear that the US would focus laser sharp on the Indo-Pacific is not really new, and that the US demands, rightfully so, if I have to admit, that Europe starts to grow up, stand on our own feet, that is nothing particularly new. I mean, sometimes you need that kind of punch in your face before you actually wake up, and I think that was kind of well-deserved in a way, if I put it bluntly.
But that happened in 22, to be real honest. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you could even argue it started 27 when Mr. Putin announced, look, I'm going to get back Ukraine. So it's not really new. However, I mean, it could have been done a little bit more elegantly. But from an industrial standpoint, I would totally agree with what was said yesterday in a way, because we deindustrialized over the last 30 years. The so-called peace dividend. We didn't give too much attention on the German armed forces, on any other European armed forces. So we need to catch up. So therefore, I would say it was a wake-up call, latest. So definitely, but a not particularly new situation that we're in. It just accelerated a little bit.
But he was not talking about all that yesterday. He was talking about Europe not being a democracy, and the way he did it. That was I meant. That was. I mean, of course, we all know that the Europeans have to do more, and that definitely was clear. And the fact that they would focus a lot more on the Indo-Pacific was clear too. But the fact that he came to the Munich Security Conference not talking about how things will have to progress in the Ukraine, how the war could be stopped, and how the situation would be afterwards, but that he talked about, we would not have a democracy in Europe. That was the way he did it. That was special.
And yet not surprising after what we heard in the last couple of weeks.
This administration is nothing but special. That's certain. Do you have any input further, or?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a clear attempt to meddle in our elections and to try to get more votes to the AfD. And I hope he's not successful in that, because that undermines our democracy. And we shouldn't let a person like J.D. Vance, who has sold his values for power, I sort of define what democracy and freedom mean, because he's destroying it in the United States, and very quickly so. And also, they're tossing their entire soft power under the bus. I mean, you just alluded to the fact that we need more hard power, and I think that has become abundantly clear. Unfortunately, we would all like to live in a different world. But we should not dismiss our soft power, because that's how Germany has been punching above its weight. And the vacuum that is now, growing because of the destruction of USAID, etc., that is a vacuum that actors like China, non-state actors, organized crime will try to occupy. And here we really have a task to do, not to let that space be taken.
I think it's what came into my mind is the paper of the Munich Security Conference, multipolarization. If this alone is probably a cause of fear at itself, and if I have a question for you, Mr. Heunkes, because the more multipolarized, what a word,
Great.
the more powerless we feel, because it's on higher surface and more partners, and each individual is getting less and less power to decide what their country is going to do, I would say, at least. And I'm very interested in what's your take. Do you think J.D. Vance...
to Europe now, or to...
Yes, like, would it increase the fear among young people or individuals in general, what happened last week, and to realize that we're getting in a more multipolarized world now? Will it increase the fear or the anxiety?
Definitely, because we are not prepared to this destabilization and to the new finding of new positions in all these debates. But I think the biggest problems which we refer to, the biggest problem is that we are mixing up different kinds of discourse strategies. So there is a public discourse, there should be a public discourse on the value of democratic or other principles. There should be the respect for human rights and several things like that. But on the other hand, the same persons which are now referring to democratic principles like the US government, they make use of these arguments for very short-term strategic objectives. And this is what is very confusing for all of us, because they are definitely not allowed. This is not acceptable, as your minister said. It is not acceptable to give this kind of interpretation. Because, and it's confusing even for young people. It's more confusing than for the older ones, I think, because they are still in a looking for the pillars of our world construction, and we can no longer find them this way. And I think this produces a lot of fear and anxiety because it's provoking uncertainty. We don't know how to go on with this discussion and to rely on what arguments really. And I think we have to rebuild the whole discussion culture to make it better. It's not the main point is not to take a position in this discussion, but to give a better order and structure to the discussion in itself.
I think that's very optimistic and also something very pragmatic we can build on, I hope.
Absolutely. Well, then let's jump on to finding integrated approaches to common security. Mr. Müller, the study that we mentioned in the beginning revealed that about 90% of the participants were not able to name a single defense company or from the defense sector, suggesting that they also don't quite grasp what these companies are actually doing, what they're responsible for, how differentiated tasks actually are. Can you give us maybe a little bit more of an insight into what these responsibilities and these tasks actually look like, and how the defense sector can maybe reposition itself to foster a better understanding for security and defense within a young generation?
Well, to put it bluntly, I don't think that a siloed out approach on educating broader public amongst Europeans is the right approach. I think this needs to be a joint efforts between academia, between the ministries, between the armed forces and other think tanks such as you are working in. So in short, it's not about positioning the defense industry on that. It's about offering something intuitive on defense, security, safety, for the people that actually will do the policies starting tomorrow, next year on this event just down the road. It's going to be you. It's going to be the youth. It's not me, because I just learned that I'm a middle-aged man, so I guess I'm pretty much out of the game. No, kidding. Don't laugh. No, but it starts actually describing and outlining a little bit what defense actually means. And maybe I can connect a couple of dots of very interesting and inspiring remarks. Start with fear. Fear, there's the physical aspect of security and safety. That's just, we are all afraid of being killed in a war zone. And believe me, I've been to many war zones. It's no fun at all. But there's also another kind of fear and anxiety among particularly Germans these days when I hear the virtual trade-off between social welfare and defense, while it shouldn't be one, honestly, and of course I need to say that because I'm defense industry, but any investment into a proper and sustainable defense industry is actually contributing to a social welfare state. It's not only the physical aspect of security and safety through tanks and warplanes, it's spearheading technology, generating IP that can be scaled and commercialized on the long run, contributing to GDP, contributing to tax, contributing to jobs. And that's something that we need to learn and open up to. And then there's the second aspect that you referred to. We need to deter, yes, because peace is, to put it very, very shortened, is just like physical balance. And peace is not the absence of forces, it's their very equilibrium. And that is what we learn the hard way these days, correct? And the third aspect is, once you define also the social security aspect of defense, ultimately we need to understand defense spending is investment into our own sovereignty, into peace, obviously, but also into our resilience. And again, where are we at the moment? Zeitenwende budget, 100 billion, great. So guess where all the money for the different platforms is going, or 80% of this is going to US platforms. And this is no criticism, because we need these platforms, because we neglected the very armed forces and its industry over the last 30 years. So we need to catch up on that. And that's something that we need to convey as a message. And last but not least, talking about sustainability and security, I mean, I would not be the one saying, look, what other peoples and colleagues of mine say, that security is the mother of all sustainability. It's basically also the other way around. If you look at the CO2 emission being generated by the war in Ukraine, it's summing up to the CO2 emissions of Belgium in a year. That's quite a lot. Now, if you look to the Middle East, to Sub-Saharan Africa, where I've been spending a lot of time back in the days when I started almost 15 years ago, there was like fountains of water. People needed to drill 50 meters. Now they need to drill 250 meters. Honestly, these people that are migrating do have a reason. And the best war is not even to have it and start tackling the root causes. So what I want to say is we must not give up on sustainability. We must not give up on ESG. Even I already hear some voices, oh no, we can give up on that stupid diversity and inclusion in ESG stuff. That would be a hardcore mistake. So I think we need to offer that interconnected understanding of what defense means, and it is beyond physical security. And I'm super sorry because that was a rather long answer.
That was a very great answer. Thank you for that.
I don't want to interrupt the applause, but I actually think that's a very good overturn to Kira as well, because sustainability and climate change is always a little bit putting up against security, because like we have to defend ourselves probably in months or something like that is said, and climate change is causing issues in 50 years, why care about it now? Sometimes a phrase we hear from people, but we actually have to balance it. Like Joe said, we actually have to do both, because it's both a threat, but we don't see the risks here right now, so much at least. So my question to you as a think tanker would be as well, how can think tanking help to make people know that that's both and not an issue against each other? So how can we get rid of the versus between security and climate change, and what can we actually do in the front line on that, I would say?
I mean, I think think tanks, academia, they can play a role in advising the government. Of course, in the end, it's democratically elected leaders who take the decisions. But I think it's good practice, and I think actually that's something that Germany has been doing quite well in different areas, not only climate, but also different areas of high complexity, that there are scientific advisory boards, that they are consulting with, for example, think tanks to assess complex risks and also to get recommendations on how to move forward. So I think think tankers can, for example, give recommendations that are of a sort of intermediary complexity. Yeah? So you have different areas of action that can be very different for each sector. But think tankers can sort of fill this gap between science and policy, and also contribute to creating platforms like we are having today, this exchange on a panel, or also in less public spaces, to have frank conversations around these issues and find common ground. I think that will be a task for our society, also in the aftermath of our upcoming election here in Germany, is that, we may have had very different viewpoints upcoming into the election, but how do we build a strong unity afterwards, and also counteract our multipolarization in our society. And I think this can be done in trusted spaces that think tanks can provide.
Thank you very much, Kira. And we'd like to continue this discussion once again with you. We have one more interactive Slido for you. And here you have the ability to type in your own answer. So take your time, not too much, because we're already running a little bit late, and we want to give you also the possibility to ask our esteemed guests your own questions. So use this as maybe an entrance to the Q&A that will follow, and also maybe let the answers guide you in your thought process. So.
And maybe we also can get some ideas from that,
exactly.
How to take something home, like a little bit of homework here.
Yeah, and let's see what this panel has given you in the past hour to think about?
Be nice.
Ooh, we're starting quite strong.
Oh, wow. All right.
Okay. And we're continuing strong. I like that one. Join junge DGAP. Who said that?
Guess.
All right.
I also like the TikTok comment. We also
That's
have a
quite
TikTok channel now in the Young DGAP, so
I'm seeing
join
a
our
happy
TikTok.
boy here.
Field trip to Warzone would be a very difficult thing, I guess.
Okay.
But probably something for the YouTube channel.
The last Slido was about 110 people. Now we just have, so we still have time.
But I think probably we can also keep it just up if we start with the Q&A. Probably somebody got
Definitely.
some more information
Also,
and ideas.
You
so
could definitely be more precise. What does youth mean? I don't know that.
Not me, obviously.
Topic, use. All right.
Getting more vague, I guess. I saw schools and left and middle. Guys, we think you know it better.
Thinking intergenerational justice. That's very good. Take your time. We still have a lot of participants to vote for.
So social media and education are two different things, or is it one? Is social media education?
It's two different things.
Different
They could
things,
be
yeah.
combined, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Education through social media. I think also an interesting question maybe for you and your part of work. How do you communicate with the younger generations? Do you use social media to educate young people? Sure.
Are we asked to react to those?
You can, of course, but we will also give our esteemed guests the possibility to maybe elaborate on what they said, or maybe take the initiative to react to something that someone else has said, or ask a completely different question. The stage will be yours in, let's give it more 2 minutes, shall we? Anybody still typing?
So Dr. Heukes can react, and you are thinking and typing.
Okay. We will have microphones on both sides, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll give the microphone to you. Well, then.
Should I say something?
Yeah.
So I would like to bring in, or
Please.
yeah, there's a lot of. Would like to bring in, because it's very big here, social media aspect, because we are all living in different or younger, and or bringing the discussion back to the generation gap as well, and referring to the fact that we are perhaps living in different worlds of communication. So this is also another way to explain the anxiety culture I was speaking about. So this way of communicating is very important for all of us, but it has, let's say, particularly strong effect on the daily lives and thoughts of young people. I'm of course referring to the social media with that, which can be dangerous because they aim at distraction and manipulation, as we know. The most dangerous effects on social media are the lack of facts and reason in arguments, and the formation of bubbles that limit a democratic culture of debate, I think. So in this poor communication culture, for example, people who support and oppose rearmament have no chance to meet, I think, in the end. And it becomes difficult to find common ground in the discussion. We can see this in the current political debates on migration restrictions as well. The mechanisms of digital communication are changing traditional debates, as I think, in Parliament and the media, but I would like to have your comments on that as well. This is causing centrist parties, the Parteien der Mitte, right now to act in a radical way, I think. They pretend to act calmly, but they make strong statements and don't compromise. But this kind of communication doesn't mix well with a balanced reason. It's surprising how quick they are to question human rights, constitutions, European law. Everything is discussed or ignored even in the discussion. And insults, hatred, stubbornness end up in democratic institutions at the end. I think this is a big danger. And I would like to have your comments on that.
Sure. We
Many questions.
First question, I think, was right there. No? Okay, there you go.
Hi. I don't have an answer to the question you just asked, but I have a question myself. I was wondering if, like, there's the lack of engagement that you mentioned in, for example, I don't know, joining the Bundeswehr or other different defense activity, let's call it like that. It can be linked to a rising sentiment of distrust in the government and in the country per se. Like you mentioned, for example, the fear of job loss and the pension, job security. Can it be linked? Like, I mean, as you can probably hear, I'm not German. So in the country where I'm from, there's this which is in Europe, there's this rising sentiment of what do I owe my country if I have a fear of don't having retirement money. So could it be a linkage between the two things?
Who is your question for? Is it for the entire panel or?
For the entire panel, yes.
Thank you.
So who wants to take it?
I can start because we did the study. And in fact, it's true what you say. People are not linked so emotionally to their countries. I mean, you see it in the numbers. Even if we would get involved into a war here on the ground, it's only 10% stating that they would definitely team up with the armed forces and go into war. And I can understand anyone who is afraid of war. Nevertheless, yes, I think mistrust, and that certainly doesn't foster or nurture a certain proximity between the armed forces, the ministries, and broader population. So I think it is linked, it correlates, and we need to open up. I mean, look at the way we were discussing about defense and security topics in the last 30 years. The short answer is not. We didn't talk about it. I mean, defense guys like me were typically wearing a black suit and hiding behind thick doors. And there was anything but transparency on the topic what defense means, what it does, what it takes, how much it costs. So I think the first step needs to be full transparency on what it actually means, but also full transparency on the implication that this called Zeitenwende will have on all of us. And from learning from many studies, I have to say, broader public, and particularly young people, are taking more than we typically expect. They can cope with it. And this is where, at least for me, from my personal standpoint, it starts. We need to provide transparency of what it actually entails and whatnot. But opening up to the others.
So nodding, it seems like you all agree with that.
Okay, should we move on to the next question? Also, please, since we are running a little bit late, be very short and precise in your questions. Thank you.
Then I take the next question from here. First of all, thank you for the informative discussion, and to all panelists, thanks a lot for being here. My question would be for Mr. Stempfle. Considering that we have about 25% of Germans, considering the current polls for the BSW and the AfD, that don't believe that the Russian Federation is at fault for this conflict, and that in fact NATO is to blame for the whole situation. How does the Ministry of Defense aim and try to convince this lost quarter, I would say, of the German population that we need to take concise action, have to stand together and take joint efforts to combat this war in Europe?
Yes, I mean, we have to realize that there are those positions, and what else can you do but talking about the subject and explaining that Russia is being very aggressive. And I mentioned all those things that we keep on saying, that they, changed from economy to war economy and all those things, and that they, expand their military and so on. I mean, the problem is if you don't discuss about that, and if you just say, okay, they are right-wing people, I don't talk to them and let them have their own opinion, that would be the problem. We need to discuss, and I think our minister is the one who is not afraid of doing that and to have a clear word. And at the same time, it's not something that you change from one moment to the other. It'll take some time, as I said before, and that's the way we have to handle that.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Natalia. I consider myself as European, as Ukrainian, and as a climate activist. I'm grateful for the straightforward comment about the intersection between a war, or the war, or a war, and the climate change. My question is, now we are asking how could young people get more engaged in foreign and security policies? Maybe we can ask, how can young people be more aware about the intersection between military action and climate change? Because when one's enemy is attacking you with a chemical weapon, those chemicals, once are under the ground and are in the water network, are circulating around the globe. So I would be very interested to hear what are our strategies, how can we enforce this understanding? Thank you.
There is a number of people who are promoting, I've also heard Ukrainians talk about this, the crime of ecocide to be included in the Rome Statute, so that it is considered a crime against peace, against humanity. And I think that is something one should really now closely consider, because large environmental destruction is often part of warfare, sometimes intentionally, as we are seeing in Ukraine, sometimes also unintentionally. And it is often a hidden sorrow, so to say, because of course we are seeing the direct fatalities of aggression, but we are often not seeing the difficulties and the health impacts and the deaths that are resulting from diseases that come even years after the fighting has stopped because of these detrimental environmental effects. So you talked about like chemicals. It can also include massive deforestation and other elements. It can include radiation, for example. And these issues are very long-term and can also inhibit development in countries for decades to come and cause real human suffering also. So I think it's very important to look at this more closely, also record these crimes so that maybe somebody can be held accountable in the future also for reparation.
I would like to add a comment on, in terms of intersection and that our world is so complicated because several risks and crises are interconnected. And I think to explain this, I come back I would like to say that a lot of these crises, we become aware of them when there are certain tipping points even. So 9/11 was perhaps the first tipping point in this sense, when we got aware of the terrorist risk. And then came others, the waves of refugees, at least in 2016 in Germany, then the pandemic, the war in Ukraine was another one, the AI revolution and so on. And it's clear that all these events trigger societal fears that are hard to overcome. And it can feel like we are powerless to stop these crises from happening or to solve them even if we are in charge. So this can lead to a sense of helplessness, especially when it comes to climate change, because you were speaking about climate change. This climate change is causing right now, currently, more and more natural disasters. And I think we have to speak about this, because this is an imminent threat, really, to all of us. Anxiety culture is a term used to describe our feelings about all these threats in a rapidly changing world, and it can be hard to deal with the complexity. The complexity is perhaps one of the key words of all these issues and the overwhelming demands on us as actors. So it's hard to find the motivation to take action or make personal commitments when you're feeling anxious. And this is another reason why people do not always agree on current topics like the arm race or find personal engagement with them. That's my view on that from my research project a little bit, just to add it.
Mr. Stempel, you had a short comment on that?
No.
Okay, so
I would propose, if you stay brief and promise me that, that we take 2 questions together and then do a final round of hopefully an optimistic message I saw a few moments ago on the screen. So 2 questions.
Herr
Müller?
Yes.
You mentioned the importance of ISG-based spending in the context of defense spending. I'm curious how Ukraine against Russia or Armenia against Azerbaijan in 2020 would have benefited from ISG-based spending in the defense sector, to get a better picture of what you meant by that. If I misunderstood you, then just dismiss my question. Thank you.
And the second one?
Oh, yeah, it's on. This goes more into the entire panel and more of a marketing issue. I've now taught political sciences both in the US and in Germany, and we've actually had some recruiters here in Germany from the Bundeswehr, and then of course in the US from Army, Marines, and whatsoever come to the school. And what I see repeatedly within my students 19 to 20, prime recruitment age, is that they feel that, let's say, a certain side of the political spectrum has created a monopoly on patriotism, let's call it that. They see joining military service as more of something for maybe those who share more of those, let's call those parties' opinions, right? So we're starting to see the politicization of joining the armed services. So I guess this goes, of course, more to those of you who that's relevant to. How do you detach yourself from that? Do you lean into that? And do you see that as the main problem as to young people not wanting to join the security services within each country?
So
could you say once more why young people would not join the army? What is the reason?
Of course, because they've seen it become politicized. And of course, I speak more to my experience in the US and some I've had here also as a teacher, in that the young people start to see, here in Germany to be specific, they see students who support the AfD lean more into those careers in the direction of the Bundeswehr. The party itself having created this culture of nationalism around themselves, and nationalism and patriotism, something very easily attached to military service. So those students who might, for example, better agree with the Greens or other parties who are also very much interested in national security, they see that part of getting their own personal lives involved with the armed services. They see it as an act of flipping to the other side of the political spectrum.
I would just say, everybody who raised their hand before, don't forget your question. We also have a reception, and I think if you ask very nicely, I think our panel will still answer to your questions afterwards. So don't forget your questions, and you promise to be brief, all of you. So keep it brief, short and sweet, please.
Maybe we start with the first question. Let's have that over a glass of wine or water, whatever, because I really need to get into some data crunching with you, if you want. So let's meet outside. I see no chance having a short answer in this.
All right. That was a short answer, so thank you.
I had to ask if I understood it correctly, and I'm still not sure, but if your question was that people who rather turn to AfD are the ones who would like to become a soldier, and that's why people who rather belong to Green or other parties would stay away from the army because of that. I think that's a completely different perception of our army that I have. I'm the speaker of the ministry and I'm gay, for instance. So I was a bit insecure myself how it would be if I'd enter this job and I came in there and everyone accepted that. And the Bundeswehr is a lot more modern and in the reality as one could think. And I think the perception that you might have, or students of your classes, this is at least old-fashioned, I would say. I think it's not the modern Bundeswehr that we have, and the minister stands for it, and he's very clear that we have that there's no right-wing movement possible within the Bundeswehr, and I think that he represents that as the minister, and I can only tell you from my experience, it's a very modern and open army.
And last time I checked, Pistorius was not AfD.
Yeah. I would like to do it on a optimistic note in the end, so probably we can just do a brief round, one sentence each. Please stick with that. We want all to enjoy our drinks. So probably everybody can say just one sentence. If we meet up next year, what would you wish young people to do, or what is the idea you saw or had during the discussion you want to take away? And I put Natalia on the spot because you're my co-moderator, so it's
fantastic. What would I want for young people to take away? I think for us as the organizers of this event, I think it's most important that you have a deeper understanding on the subject, the intersectionality on everything that is related to defense, on how it's just not, tanks and munition and war and everything that is ugly, but how deeply interconnected everything is. It's not either or. Everything has to do with, with your values, democracy. It has to do with climate change. It has to do with cybersecurity. And this is the world we live in. It's complex, and I'm sorry, I'm being way too long for this, but I also want you to still feel optimistic. I don't know, we've talked about how we are now the generation that has to come terms with the fact that, unfortunately, we do not live in peaceful times. We live in times that we might have to ask ourselves, what am I willing to do to protect this peace? Because, the protection of peace is not something abstract that only the government can do. We're responsible for upholding this peace. We are responsible for protecting this peace and this democracy. As J.D. Vance has said, well, if the state can be, toppled by a few $1,000s and some comments online, it's a very fragile thing to begin with. Yes, it is. But it is also something that is worth fighting for. And as the next generation, I hope that you take with you that it's our common responsibility to do something for it, and I hope that we do.
And please don't take Natalia's example. I think she was just giving you time to think. Please be brief, one sentence.
I would go building on what you said with the reconstruction of hope.
Damn, that was short.
There you go.
No, it starts today with having you folks in the audience on a Saturday night, when back in the days I would probably do something else on a Saturday night. Now, thank you. Thank you for being so engaged, and that gives me hope and gives me a huge chunk of positivity, and I can't wait to provide transparency and get engaged with you and others in a heated debate on defense, security, and safety. So, thanks.
Yes, I would perhaps quote Winston Churchill at the end, who said, "Fear is a reaction, courage is a choice." And fear as a reaction describes the anxiety culture we are living in, especially young people. But as we are all part of this anxiety culture, it will be difficult, though not impossible, to find the courage to act or react constructively. And I think this is the big challenge, and I hope we can we can achieve that on the basis of a better culture of debate based on democratic principles.
I wish that we would have an even livelier discussion with young people and other generations of our society, and that next year there would be no need for anyone to ask whether the Bundeswehr is close to some not democratic and extremist or partly extremist views, but that it's clear that it's in the middle of democracy. So I would be happy about that too.
And I'm happy that young people have a seat at the table in this discussion, but also in the audience. And I think we are still at the beginning of all of this.
Thank you very much. And before we finally end our conversation here, we'd like to thank you once again for joining us here today. It's been very insightful. I think I speak for all of us. So another round of applause for our esteemed panel. Thank you for being here with us.
And happy birthday.
And once again, a very happy birthday to Professor Dr. Ulrich Heukes.
You are not allowed to. Thank you.
And you're welcome to now open the reception for us and join the conversation at a glass of wine. Thank you. Danke auch. Ich finde es so eine wunderbare